The insider threat is one of the most complex challenges facing organizations and law enforcement alike. It is defined as one or more individuals with the access or inside knowledge of an organization that would allow them to exploit the vulnerabilities of that entity's security or facilities with the intent to cause harm. This video examines three manifestations of the insider threat. Terrorism, where an insider attacks civilians for a political ideology. Workplace violence, and a coworker who commits a violent act in the office. And finally, the multifaceted insider threats of cybersecurity, both those looking to penetrate network security and those who open vulnerabilities by not following protocol. We begin by looking at counterterrorism and how a political ideology can drive an insider toward radicalization in plain sight. For instance, San Bernardino, where in 2015, two gunmen pledging allegiance to ISIS attacked co-workers at an office Christmas party. 40 were wounded or killed in the attack, which was foreshadowed by several workplace arguments regarding religion and politics. The couple exhibited many signs of radicalization, obtaining media by Al-Qaeda and ISIS, confronting co-workers about their faith, and purchasing more than $30,000 in weapons. The attack resulted in a deadly shootout with police on the highway, and a sweep of the area revealed that the couple had intended to use improvised explosives in the attack. What can we do to prevent attacks like this in the future, when an insider has voiced radical ideations and begins to intimidate colleagues? We talked to experts about the signs of radicalization and the use of reporting suspicious behavior to law enforcement. One of those experts is Ed Davis, who was commissioner of the Boston Police Department when they faced a terror attack of their own just 2 years earlier.
One of the things that we recognized after sort of doing a post-mortem on the Tsarnaev investigation was that Tamerlan had acted out in the mosque in Cambridge. On two different occasions he had objected and had arguments with the imam about what the imam was suggesting. He wanted the imam to be more radical, to be more in alignment with Sharia law and less Western in the way that he was teaching Islam. And so that's a warning. When you see somebody in the congregation standing up and demanding things that might indicate extremism, if that imam had felt comfortable enough with us to call us and say, I don't know what to do with this guy, they eventually ejected him from the mosque. If at some point we had heard about that, it may have reactivated the FBI investigation. And whether it was his family or the community around him, if someone had reached out to us, it might have changed the whole trajectory of this incident. I think people should realize that police get calls like this all the time, reporting a fear or something that's concerning them. We would much rather check that out and have it lead to nothing than not get the call and have an incident occur.
When it comes to insider threat, when it comes to counterterrorism, we can and should suffer false positives. Shutting down non-viable paths or proving the null is just as valuable or sometimes more valuable than being on the scent of the truth, and in fact can help you get there faster.
If I could say anything that you can glean and you can learn by providing information that turns out to be false, if you will, is that you're building the relationship, right? You're learning a protocol that you may not have been familiar with prior, so that when you do have another insider threat, then you know who to call and you know how to make sure that information is getting to the right people quickly. That's not something people do every day. They're seeing something that makes them say, I need to pass some information on. History shows us that in these active shooter situations, the insider threat is real, and it can have global ties and global links, as we found in 2009 at Fort Hood. Major Nadal Hassan, who was well known, and then afterward, as we found, had been communicating overseas with an Imam, Anwar al-Awlaki. Prior to that, the Department of Defense also had a lot of pre-incident indicators from people he had been talking to and presenting to other soldiers who said this individual is radicalizing.
As we found in the 2009 Fort Hood shooting, even a United States Army base is not immune from the insider threat. Though deemed an act of workplace violence, the gunman in this case exhibited many signs of radicalization that highlights the relationship between counterterrorism and the insider threat.
I see from my experience some similarities between a counterterrorism threat and a threat within a company from an insider. And I think a key way to look at this is that this person is deceiving those around him. I know there's a lot of reluctance of employees about maybe turning in one of their fellow employees, somebody that sits in the next cubicle to them. But the way you have to frame that in your mind is this person is deceiving everybody, to include you.
The problem was so much simpler a couple of decades ago, and I think probably no national security issue has undergone such significant, profound, and complex change. I think in today's threat environment, the idea of separating the insider threat or the cyber threat from the insurgency threat or the anarchist threat is impossible to do. They all kind of roll up into one big, really difficult to understand and to deal with threat.
People are looking for answers. They feel uncertain because of new headlines that pop up every week of a mass shooting here or an incident occurring there. People want to know what to do in their own business environment. They want to know what to do when they're at the mall. And so talking through that with people is extremely important. And I think the see something, say something is the start of a very important process that people can learn to make themselves and their family safer.
DHS's See Something, Say Something campaign is an effort to enable and empower civilian stakeholders to report suspicious activity that may represent a concern. As Jason Jones discussed in the lead-up to the 2009 Fort Hood shooting, there were many signs of potential radicalization as Major Nidal Hasan spoke openly with fellow soldiers about his grievances with the United States government. Had these concerns been reported to the proper authorities, it's possible this event could have been prevented. The lessons learned from this case illustrate that many tenets of counterterrorism may be applied to issues such as workplace violence, as the office is one of many smaller environments with a broad exposure to an individual's behavioral baseline. What can we learn from the See Something, Say Something campaign that can be utilized in the workplace?
DHS has a great program called See Something, Say Something. It's linked to SAR, suspicious activity reporting, all over the United States within local, state, and federal governments. And the program has proven to be successful. But the key for an insider threat is to make sure that that information is getting to those folks who can analyze that information and then act upon it. And what do we always hear afterward, right? We hear that there was an indicator. Somebody made an outcry, provided information to HR or to a supervisor, but that information was never acted upon. And then if we look at the pathway to violence as to how fast they begin once they go overt, we aren't acting fast enough with the information that we do get when either it be a supervisor or law enforcement that gets the information. And that's an important piece of it. That's what we're trying to get to, right, is preparedness. How can you prevent these incidents? How can you protect the folks, mitigate the problem, respond effectively, and at the same time be able to recover as an individual, an organization, and as a community from these events. Yeah, the insider threats are a real problem, and it's learning that pathway to a new tradecraft of collecting information.
The pathway to violence, in a simplified form of that, is 4 major components to it. The first is the ideation, or the thought about using violence to address a perceived or real grievance or provocation. High base rate behavior, most of us have those reactions, few of us actually act on it. The next step in the evolution of the risk is a planful approach, so engaging in planning around it. Not just, I'm mad at the boss, I feel betrayed by my coworkers, but they need to pay for it, and now how? So I start thinking, do I want to embarrass or shame them? Do I want to cause physical damage? Do I want to sabotage IT systems? Do I want to use physical violence? There's a whole set of behaviors that go along with each of those stages that tend to be observable to others, or at least there's a reasonable likelihood that they're observable to others. It may not be illegal behavior, it may not be by itself disruptive behavior, but it stands out as a deviation from the norm.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? I mean, because you want to do the right thing, but at the same time, not give up information on someone who, probably just trying to voice their concerns or some issues that they're having.
People, your coworkers, you don't want to tattle on them. That saying's not only for, gang members, don't snitch. You always hear that phrase, out there. Coworkers don't want to get somebody in trouble because, they don't want to get them fired, from their livelihood and things like that. But but things should be reported up. And I think it starts at the organization level of fostering that positive environment to see, hey, yeah, report it and let's look into it. How is that organization going to deal with that?
Here's the background of that. If you know a piece of information, you don't know what someone else knows, right? There may have been a prior incident with that individual, and that's why it's important to report these things to leadership within your organization so that we can try to mitigate and prevent these problems.
What we're asking people to do is to share observations about relatively small subsets of behavior, because we've learned from experience that it's unlikely that any one person will be in a position to know everything about a circumstance. So what that means is that we're asking people to share information about things that will not in fact turn out to be highly problematic. And we need for people to know that that's okay and is not going to result in adverse actions that aren't merited. That doesn't involve just reporting. It involves taking the steps that are within a person's purview, within their skill set, to deal with themselves. Now, I don't mean by themselves, but take initial steps. The example I often use is, let's say we've got a door that's being left open, propped open through the day. It's all well and good that somebody keeps reporting that, but it's also important to go and shut the door.
I got my own personal experience with that. One of the most famous and damaging spies in U.S. history was Anna Montes. I worked on the same floor as Anna Montes in DIA. I passed her every day. She was a very good analyst, and I personally bear responsibility for having her read into some of the darkest, deepest, blackest programs we had, because she was the one person that really understood Cuban. Now we know why. But she understood it, and everybody felt the same way about her. Good analyst, but there's something wrong here. But nobody, including myself, wanted to go to security and say, you know, you really ought to take a look at her.
I didn't work exactly near her, but I worked around her, and I worked with her on several projects over the course of probably 10 years. I never really suspected that she would have been a spy. I suspected that she had many, issues, none that would have impacted, her performance at work or anything like that. So it didn't really cause me a lot of concern. But it's a case of somebody, even within the intelligence community, with a tremendous amount of operational experience, really never took, notice of this spy who did irreparable harm to the U.S. government and our policies in all over South America. Denial, is a key aspect of you not reporting it, because you can't imagine it happening to you in your workplace, and that again always has to be considered, is your personal denial that something is actually occurring.
Vigilance by coworkers, supervisors, and so on. Good intelligence collection and analysis are important, but they're just as important as luck. And you increase the chances of luck by putting more information into the hopper that allows somebody to go, wait a minute.
What Dr. Gene Dysinger described in The Pathway to Violence is an extended period of time and exposure between a potential inside threat and those around them in their day-to-day life. In the case of Anna Montes and the Defense Intelligence Agency, the odd behaviors exhibited by Montes over the course of many years were representative of an underlying deception, as she served as a double agent for the Cuban government. As with the 2009 Fort Hood shooting, there were behaviors detected by those around Montes, and had the concerns of colleagues been reported to those with the powers to investigate that behavior, it's possible that this spy may have been discovered before she caused so much damage. To this point, it's clear that taking action and reporting suspicious behaviors is key. But what type of behaviors should we be concerned with?
Hindsight is 20/20, and I really think it's important to unpack that and why. The microsignals that said that such and such person was either going to harm themselves or harm other people or do it in the workplace, whatever it is, they were there. It was a matter of not bringing them all together. We all know that. We talk about connecting the dots. But we haven't yet had a real conversation about what that means.
Well, I mean, it's the insider threat, from my experience, is kind of the classic spy or asset within your organization. The ways you would pick up on that person would be, undue affluence, maybe repeated security violations, kind of these classic indicators that anybody that grew up in the intelligence community would recognize.
Some employees may not quite fit in, or they may have personal problems that they bring over to the workplace. They might have financial problems or problems with relationships with a spouse or a girlfriend that spills over into the workplace and affects their work. This will be noticed by their colleagues and supervisors, and then they will respond to these situations in a negative way. This population is in the tiny minority. They start doing things that are out of place or out of character. They're likely to become very closed-lipped about what they are doing and become increasingly isolated so that their risky activities will not be found out by others.
But again, you go back to the human factor of you don't want to report or tell on your coworker when it might just be something, they might have had a fight with their spouse, or their kid might have got bad grades or something. Like I said, we all have bad days. It's easy to understand that. Now where it's not as black and white, there's not easy metrics where you can say, okay, if you see behavior A, you must turn them in. Because it's such a subjective area. Where is the tipping point where that becomes violence? It's really hard to identify.
The real challenge comes in trying to assess the intent behind that activity. So on a human level, obviously, you're trying to connect with your colleague, you want to be supportive, and you might push out of your mind as part of that effort why they might be feeling that way, what might be causing that tension. Is there something else at play beyond what they've shared? Maybe are they trying to purposefully elicit that emotion out of you so that you're empathetic and sympathetic and not focusing on something else that's going on in their life? Oftentimes with these things, because there is a human dimension, because we all can be sort of distracted and manipulated to an extent, or just affected by our own emotions when trying to reach out to a colleague, the best way to overcome missing a signal that something might be off or there might be a threat is to see what other indicators might be there, or just information. Let's not even call them indicators yet, because that also presupposes some bias in terms of it being nefarious or not. But what's really going on with this person?
But again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier. You must take action and start the investigative process to see where that individual is in that. And that process can take you, if you're a private organization, outside of your department, outside of your agency, working and collaborating. And that's why I say collaboration is the key in the 21st century.
Again, going back and looking at the health of the overall organization, it takes one bad apple to ruin the bunch. In my experience, in looking at that behavior that's a little different, a little unusual, especially breaking from a norm. Not that breaking from a norm means something bad is going to happen, but you still need to kind of evaluate that, if it's something out of the ordinary. My old organization, that was very well. It almost brought down it was an incident that happened in a specific region of the country. Because of the actions of a few, it almost brought the entire agency to its knees. One agent finally said something during, over the course of over a period of time, said something like, "This is not right. I've been taught better." And finally, they've kind of reported up to what they were witnessing there in the specific, region. And it kind of dealt with an investigation and some bad practices. However, again, that was a few people. And if that agent wouldn't have said anything and that bad behavior or bad practices continued, maybe it would have, brought down the agency.
Your personal biases can always sway you because you can't imagine it happening to you in your workplace. And that, again, always has to be considered is your personal denial that something is actually occurring. And I've always said that the easiest person to fool is usually yourself.
It seems that there are often several behaviors or indicators in the life cycle of an insider threat. Some are less malevolent, such as changes in behavior or appearance. Some are so-called mid-range behaviors, such as speaking out about a grievance against a community or employer, and some still may include high-risk behaviors, such as potential violent acts. The key is that the more information reported within an organization or community leads to more opportunities for intervention. What experts have shown us in the last two sections on workplace violence and counterterrorism is that it requires vigilance from all levels of an organization or community to identify suspicious behavior and potential threats as they emerge. Having reporting mechanisms in place to communicate concerns is also critical, whether that means an organizational plan to report workplace concerns anonymously, outreach to local law enforcement, or participation in the See Something, Say Something campaign. As we are about to learn, however, insider threats in the cyber realm require another level of preparedness. While much of this video is centered around those seeking to harm an organization from within, Jackie Barbieri and Al Phoenix showed how reporting even casual misconduct in the workplace can protect the organization by enabling internal mechanisms to assess security gaps. General misconduct, or not following protocols, represent an insider whose actions are not intended to harm the organization, but whose behavior puts the community at risk anyway. The field of cybersecurity is divided by this unique challenge. Malevolent insiders often have easy access to sensitive data on a daily basis. Worse yet, even honest employees may pose a threat if they lack the training necessary to keep your network secure. So which is worse, the conscious threat or the unintentional vulnerability?
Both are important, and usually you may not have control over either one, or you may have control over only one. Threats are something, again, bad that could happen, and usually an organization is not going to have control over a threat. They can have awareness of a potential threat that can occur, but they don't have control over that particular activity taking place. A vulnerability is something that, again, is a weakness in the system. So an organization can absolutely take a look at what vulnerabilities are present in their system and start to proactively manage them.
The name of the game is not necessarily just buying everything that you can to make yourself secure. It's really about making it just hard enough so that you don't pop up on their radar. Especially for small businesses, small organizations, the three things on the user side is what we talked about: two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and use a VPN.
Two-factor authentication is what you have, something you know and something you have. And something you have could be a token or a rotating password, but something you have should be something that is difficult for a potential hacker to compromise.
But then when you're looking at the network, then you start talking about proper segmentation, making sure users don't have unauthorized or access they don't necessarily need. What the bad guys are going to do is they're going to find that person who has that access, right? Everyone knows when they have a problem on their computer, they call the IT guy, and that IT guy, without being in the same room, can take over their mouse and move it around on the screen, right? That's the guy that the bad guys are looking for, because they want to control his computer without him knowing it, because he has access to everybody's computer and every other computer, usually every other corner of their network. That's what the bad guys use to get inside and steal what they need to steal.
And really, a lack of understanding is what leads to so many problems. You know, one of the biggest methods for gaining footholds is still phishing, spear phishing campaigns. You get an email that looks like something that you should click on, open it, looks legitimate, you know, click here, reset your password. Yeah, that seems like it came from Facebook or from IT support of my company, and you click on it, and all of a sudden, without you even knowing, it's laid a payload in your computer, and whether or not you reset it, there are some really crazy things that can be done, and you would know for years whether or not something's been done to your computer, and they're just sitting there capturing your keystrokes. So sure, your password might be invisible to the naked eye, but they can see which keys you've hit, and they're able to capture all of that.
It sounds silly, but there's obviously the advanced persistent threat, which is where they're looking to gain access into your network, and once they're in, they're continuing to dig their way through the network to identify data and pull that data out so they can, you know, do with it whatever they would like to. Insider threat is looking at the internal controls and the behaviors of the individuals that are working for, you know, in your organization to ensure that the folks that have access to very sensitive or proprietary information paying attention to the behaviors of those individuals and ensuring that you have the right security controls in place so that they are not exfiltrating or taking data and utilizing it against company purposes.
When we're talking about this with clients, we see this with clients, is they'll have an issue with an employee pop up. Maybe it's a rogue employee. It goes back to a lot of activity logs and monitoring their behavior digitally, because if they're accessing places they shouldn't access, or rarely access, or they're working at odd hours, or they're downloading a bunch of information they necessarily shouldn't, and then emailing it to their personal Gmail account and say, you know what, Bob hasn't been coming to work, or he's been coming in late every day. Like, something's kind of fishy with him. You can go back and look at his activity logs and see what's going on. Then it turns into kind of an HR and a leadership function to find out and talk to Bob. What's going on? Do you have problems? Or just somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing.
Most people would think of a security attack, but a threat can actually be an innocent employee that unintentionally does something, makes an error, which causes an incident. And that sounds like something everybody would know, but humans should be looked at as almost human detection sensors. If someone is aware within your organization and they report it, then that can potentially shut down a potential attack before something bad happens.
They're not hacking websites anymore. They're paying somebody off to insert a thumb drive, somebody who actually works there or has normal access, or they are trying to clone badges and get inside through the badge reader and sit down at a workstation or a conference room that's unoccupied. They're not hacking anything. They're manipulating people, and they're able to get inside. So once they get on the network, they're already inside, and they're already a trusted user, so firewall's not going to do anything. We're already past the firewall.
And there are so many foundational elements that become a part of the culture of how you build your organization. Security really should be a part of that, and understanding that when I open up an email, that can expose our organization to risk. When I engage in conversations or have my laptop out in areas and use a public Wi-Fi, that exposes my organization to risk. I think really building in awareness to the culture of a business, of how you as an individual can either be a point of risk or a point of strength.
I think having an educated workforce is critical, because again, I think there are so many things that can happen with humans that having a basic fundamental level of understanding about things they should look out for, things to be aware of, can be your best defense, I think, in trying to protect the information and the company assets. The better informed and trained your organization and the people within your organization are, the better off you are as an organization, because cyber shouldn't just be about the people that are responsible for information security. Cyber is an ecosystem, so it should be looked at as all of the assets that you have in your organization as well as the people. So the more aware your people are, the better you're going to have an overall comprehensive and holistic security program.
The insider threat is a complex and adaptive challenge. Whether you're attempting to keep your community safe from an act of terror, attempting to protect your colleagues from an act of workplace violence, or securing your intellectual property from cybercrime, what we've learned today is the value of communication across all levels of the community. This may mean elevating concerns to superiors if you see a colleague exhibiting behaviors that may indicate they're on the pathway to violence. Being comfortable reaching out to law enforcement when you see something that makes you uncomfortable in public, and ensuring that you possess the knowledge and training to protect yourself and your organization from potential threats, both physical and digital. The proximity of an insider threat to your organization is exactly what makes this challenge so dynamic. However, that frequent exposure also provides opportunities for intervention. Now that you're armed with information about the pathway to violence, indicators of radicalization, and reporting mechanisms in place to assist you, you and your organization are now capable of mitigating the insider threat and potentially rescuing a friend or colleague in deep crisis. For more information on the insider threat and the active shooter threat, please visit dhs.gov/active-shooter-preparedness. There you'll find more resources such as the DHS Pathway to Violence fact sheet and other information and resources for preparedness that ensure if you do see something, you'll be able to say something.